Thank you all. I can't tell you how grateful I am to be here. And I chaired the Commission for Women under like 3 or 4 mayors for over 20 years. And I'm just so impressed with this conference. And to find out that it's been going on for 4 years is even more mind-boggling to me. So for all of you that are here, for the people that organized it, really, you are a national example. And congratulations to all of you. I'm Chris Warnke, and again, it's wonderful to be here on this day and to talk about women in voting. And I've been working, for years. I grew up in Montgomery County, and I actually started my career with Paul Sarbanes, helping him, which was John's father, helping him get elected. So that tells you how far away I go back. But then I got my way to Capitol Hill and ended up working in the Senate Majority Leader's office. And that's where I got my political stripes, so to speak. But today we just have a great topic, but I have to tell you, I was looking at the bios of all these amazing women here, sitting up here, and I'm gonna let them all introduce themselves. But before I do that, I just wanna say that today, it's very interesting that you decided to hold your conference today, because in Lorton, Virginia, a museum is being opened today that is honoring the first women, the women suffragists. There was a woman called Lucy Burns, and I don't know if anybody knows, the first people to picket the White House were suffragists. How many people know that? Well, I'm impressed, because
They also got jail.
And they got in jail, and it was,
Iron Jaws.
yeah, it was just amazing. It was just the story about the night of terror, and they were tortured, which is just phenomenal. And so, it's so heartwarming to know that we're doing this today for women that were tortured, and finally, and Lordy, I was thinking, God, Lordy, and having this museum. But anyway, I just thought it was just apropos. We've come full circle. So I'm going to let each one start off and just introduce themselves. And as I said, I'm reading your bio. There's some Chris, Michelle, and Krish, and Diane. So.
Could you speak really loudly?
Yeah, because you can't hear?
I can't hear you.
Okay, we don't have microphones.
Just speak loudly.
Sure.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Whittaker. I usually don't get to go first, being a W. I'm now, so this is great. Do the first introduction. I always joke around with my husband because my maiden name is Brooke, so I was at the top of the alphabet. And then I got married, and I was like, you moved me down, yeah. But I'm really happy to be here. I'm the statewide coordinator for Ranked Choice Voting Maryland. I live in Montgomery County in Kensington. And I've been active not only on ranked choice voting, but for the last 7 years working on both the policy side of electoral reform, whether we're talking about public financing, automatic voter registration, redistricting reform, as well as ranked choice voting, which you'll have some information on that, and we'll be talking about that in more detail. I also really like to put my policy work into practice, and so I had the opportunity in 2018 to be the campaign manager for a public financing candidate running in Montgomery County in the at-large race with 33 other candidates running in that race. And so I'll share a little bit more about my experiences with that as well. And right now I'm a campaign manager in DC for another candidate who's running under a public financing system in DC that they're using it for the first time. And so I'm really a big advocate for systems that really help empower women to be able to run effectively, to win effectively, and then move forward to serving effectively for their communities. So I'm really glad to be here.
So I think going along the lines of backwards alphabets, my last name is Vignarajah, so it is such a treat to go second. So my name is Krish O'Mara Vignarajah. I feel like in my name it's sort of the melting pot of America. The O'Mara is my Irish Catholic husband, Colin Patrick O'Mara. I serve as president and CEO of Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. It's a national immigration nonprofit headquartered in Baltimore. So I'll note that I actually wasn't born here. I was born in Sri Lanka, so halfway around the world. My parents fled the Civil War that unfortunately engulfed the country and came here when I was 9 months old. I grew up in Maryland. Both my parents were Baltimore public school teachers, product of Maryland public schools. Then went away for school, was in school for a very long time, as you can probably see from my bio. Came back, was a lawyer, started a small business, served in the Obama administration. I was senior advisor to Secretary Clinton and Secretary Kerry at the State Department, and then went to the White House and served as Michelle Obama's policy director. Came out of the White House very pregnant, thought I would finally take a little bit of a break. Instead, launched my campaign for governor on my daughter's 3rd-month birthday. I am not the governor, so alas, did lose. Fought valiantly. For most of the campaign, was the only woman running against 8 men, so I know we will probably talk a little bit about that. But try to continue to fight the good fight these days, working on immigration.
Hello, everyone. I'm Diane Hibino. I'm currently the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County. You all know that the League is local. We do all of our planning locally, but we also are members of the Maryland State League and of the National U.S. League. And you probably know, and you will find out later, that not only did the 19th Amendment pass 100 years ago, but the League of Women Voters was founded as a result, also 100 years ago, including the League of Women Voters of Montgomery County. So we've been around a long time. I've lived in the county since 1988, and however lived overseas for several of those years, but have been a League member since the 70s when I lived in Connecticut. I was also a League member in Miami-Dade County, Florida. I actually helped make sure that there were no hanging chits on those ballots that people were very upset about. And I've been here in Montgomery County then since the late 80s. My son went through Gaithersburg High School as a graduate. But my passion is the League of Women Voters because we are nonpartisan. We are political, but nonpartisan. We were formed to educate the public on what's going on, what are the issues, who are the candidates, and we also wear another hat, not only on voting and elections, but we want the public to be civically engaged. And that is the mission of the League, and that's a little bit of my background.
So Diane, thank you all, and I just came back from Iowa last weekend. My good friend, dear friend of 35 years, organized the Brown and Black presidential forum. 11 candidates showed up, and we had over 3 million Facebook viewers. It was phenomenal. But one of the things I wanted to talk about today, and Diane, I guess maybe I should put this question to you. The original, obviously, the suffragists were white, educated women. A lot has changed, and I just see the power of women in color and diversity, not just in this recent last 6 months, but certainly over the last, 5 to 10 years. Can we talk a little bit about how you see it moving forward?
Sure. I was tasked with trying to bring us, give us a context of women and the vote. I know we heard a lot of it today with the keynote speaker, but you have to remember that it didn't happen quickly in 1920, that women were trying to get the vote from the 1840s. And at that time, they wanted it because they thought of it as a human right. However, after the Civil War in the 60s, 1860s and 70s, the ex-slaves also wanted the right to vote. And Frederick Douglass said that he thought the hour belonged to the Negro. And there were the 14th and 15th Amendments, right, to give citizens rights and protections under the law and voting rights with no discrimination based on race or color. Her name was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was outraged in 1870 that the blacks would get the vote before women. And so it was not this easy path where everybody was trying to get the vote at the same time. Going on in the late 1800s, there were states in the West who allowed women to vote. They were Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Idaho, and it was not just because of the human rights part of it. They wanted more votes either in Utah to counter the Mormon votes or in Colorado with the populist movement. So there were other agendas there. So now we move to the 1900s, and the National American Women's Suffrage Association has new leadership. No longer Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who were kind of aging out as leaders. And the new ones wanted to continue the original movement. And they thought, well, maybe if we don't get the vote nationally, we might be able to say to our state and local leaders that we want we should vote as mothers and as municipal housekeepers. And so there were states that allowed women to vote, but only on state and local issues. And you know, in the South, while men and Black men were given the right to vote, they faced terror, violence, the poll tax, literacy tests where they had to explain the Constitution and things that were very unjust. And so there was not a lot of voting nationally at that time. However, as we move forward into the 1900s, labor unions said, okay, we will vote for you, support you. And Theodore Roosevelt said he would support the women's right to vote. And the women were quite smart. They used public relations. They used newspapers, pamphlets, mass meetings, and parades as they pushed for their right to vote. However, in the East and in the South, they were against it. How, the South said, would we ever empower the Southern Black women's votes? It was unacceptable at the time of Jim Crow, right, in the South. And others said women did not need the vote because they were politically represented already by their husbands, by their sons, and by their fathers. So we keep moving forward. There were states that did give women the right to vote. And there was a new leader, Alice Paul, who wasn't so passive. She wanted to be more active. And she was one of these people who stood in front of the White House and with others protested their lack of right to vote. And they were the ones, as you mentioned, who went to the Occoquan workhouse in Virginia and were tortured, beaten, tied to cell bars, and force-fed after they started a hunger strike. And as you said, today it's a National Park Service historical memorial. So who was president at the time? It was Woodrow Wilson. He at first was against women having the vote, but he saw that in many states, at the state level, women were getting the right to vote, and the Congress changed. And there were more states with who had representatives in Congress where women did have the right to vote. So he also saw what happened in World War I, where women stepped up and did a lot of work that the men were doing. So he did change, and he worked with Congress, first the House and then the Senate, and finally on June 4th, 1919, the Senate passed it. Of course, it had to be ratified in all the states, and at the same time, we heard this morning about Sojourner Truth. There were others, because Black women were not included in this formula. There was Mary Church Terrell, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Sarah Parker Remond, and Fannie Barrier Williams, among others. So what does it mean when the vote came? It was for white, middle, and upper class women who were fairly well educated. Did you know that Native Americans were not granted citizenship until 1924? Did you know that still in the South, those who wanted to vote faced the same violence and poll tax and other threats? and that Asian-born women were not given the right to citizenship until 1952. So yes, if you are US born like my generation and my parents, but my grandparents were not allowed to even apply for citizenship. So what do we see today? In the South and in places like Wisconsin, I just read, polls are being purged of names.
It happened
There's-
in Maryland too.
And in Maryland,
My
okay.
husband was one of them.
There we have it, an example right here. And there's terrible gerrymandering that is affecting who votes and what the results are. So I just want to close this history part by saying there are the archives, rightfully hers, an exhibit on American women and the vote. At the Belmont Hall House, it's now a national monument to women's equality, and the Library of Congress. If you have not gone to any of these exhibits, you should see them. The Library of Congress says, shall not be denied, and it's an excellent exhibit. So where does the League stand? And I'll finish up here. The League of Women Voters, as I said, started in 1920, and there was a woman here in Montgomery County named Lavinia Engel. Her mother actually testified before Congress with Susan B. Anthony. But the daughter, Lavinia Margaret Engel, worked very hard for the suffragists in the early 1900s and became a founding director of the Maryland League of Women Voters, founder of the Maryland League of Women Voters. She was the first woman in the House of Delegates, a county commissioner, and worked with Social Security. She also traveled far and wide in the South to be part of this movement. And she was also in front of the White House with the others and put into jail. So the League today, as I said before, is dedicated to not only the women having the right to vote, but knowing who to vote for, who are the candidates, what are the issues, so you won't be an ignorant voter, so you will be an informed voter. The other half of what the League does is for people to be engaged politically. And I know both of you are engaged very much politically, and that's what we want to see. So I think a lot of the first women legislators elected to Congress and locally and statewide got their start in the League of Women Voters because that was a way to learn about what was going on and what the issues were. So I'm going to stop right there to say that today we are still active 100 years later, and maybe later I can tell you what other things we're doing today.
That's great. Thank you for all your work in the League. It's just amazing. Krish, because I'm fascinated that you ran for governor. And being, an ethnic woman, how did you deal with going out into the field? Of course, we need to have a cultural shift here in this country as a whole to talk, to deal with our cultural differences. But locally, how did you deal with it as a woman, coming from, an ethnic background, unlike your male counterparts?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you dealt with that and what you can share with the audience in terms of what they can be doing if they decide to run for office and how they can use that to empower them actually.
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you that I had always been on the policy side, not really on the politics, except for some knocking on doors when I was 7 or 8 with my mom for Senator Mikulski. I had always sort of viewed myself, even when I was in law school and a lot of my classmates, our third year of law school, were missing in action. And I was like, these kids are such delinquents. And they were working on the presidential campaign. And of course, a year later, I'm knocking on their doors, sending them emails, being like, okay, so you guys landed jobs. And it turns out that, you're leading agencies. I didn't know kind of how the system worked. I didn't know how you prepare to run for office. And so candidly, it felt like I was building that plane as I was flying it. And so for those who kind of wonder, and women are so kind of subject to this, what do I need to do in order to prepare? Or don't I need to run for this office before I need to do so? I hope my experience can be helpful. I had left the administration, had a lot to say about kind of what we accomplished. I think that people may have experienced a little bit of buyer's remorse, and it was nice to see the appreciation, at least at the end of the administration, for what President Obama had accomplished. And as I was giving speeches across the state and talking a little bit about where I thought that the party needed to rebuild, folks started approaching me and they said, why aren't you running? And I looked kind of down and I couldn't see my own 2 feet, and I said, this should sort of explain it. But thankfully, people were like, isn't that actually all the more reason to run? And I was actually at the Western Maryland Democratic Summit, and there was a woman who came up to me and she said that there are a number of women who actually want to support women running for executive office, not just legislative office. And she said, we're looking nationally, and candidly, the 2 races that we're particularly interested in are Maryland and Illinois. And it was sort of this West Wing moment, because she pulled out this crumpled piece of paper and she said, we've actually been vetting a dozen candidates. None of them can beat Governor Hogan. We just found the candidate who can. We just have to wait until she has her baby to convince her to run. And hand to heart, it was still so far off my radar. And, a few women, as I said, people had started talking to me about running, and I thought, oh, I should talk to that woman, because if she's pregnant and thinking about running for governor, this could be helpful. And, I'm very much a data, kind of a numbers-oriented person, and so she sort of talked to me about the calculations here in Maryland, and I thought, as I saw the poster board of the all-male slate at that moment, I thought, how can we allow for that just to be the options, right? In the great state of Maryland, that has a legacy of Harriet Tubman, Barbara Mikulski, and yes, I'm going to count Nancy Pelosi too. How is it that we live in a state where we have an all-male congressional delegation, that in terms of our traditional statewide elected officials, all 4, in terms of the governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, comptroller, are men? It has been wonderful to see our treasurer, Nancy Kopp, representing. It's amazing to see the new Speaker of the House, Adrian Jones. So we are making some improvement, but we're so far from where we need to be. And so I thought, I cared deeply at that moment. I specifically cared most about education, and I thought the Kerwin Commission was going to come up with its recommendations. We obviously see what's happening right now, and I thought someone has to run. And so I threw my hat in the ring. I know we'll talk a little bit about some of the specific barriers. Obviously, in a statewide race where you need to just get your name out there, fundraising is so critical. That was the biggest challenge for me. And yet we raised almost $500,000, but I was running in a field where most of the men raised at least that, if not twice, 5 times that. And if you counted outside money, in some cases, 10 times that. So the fact that we came in essentially 3rd in a crowded field is something to think about. It's not crazy to run statewide as a first-time candidate. But I will tell you that, the fact that a 37-year-old running for president gets fewer questions about electability than a 38-year-old running for governor suggests that there is a gender bias. It's just a reality we face. And the truth is, it isn't just the media and it isn't just men. Because I would have some women who, I had a woman who had heard me speak at a forum. She said, I want to support your campaign, asked my team to send her a mailer. She received a mailer. She saw me holding my baby in my hands. When I called her, she said, I received the mailer. I didn't realize you have a baby. Honestly, I think you need to stay at home and take care of your baby. And it takes a lot to kind of silence me, but I was somewhat shocked and stunned. And so I paused and I said, you know what? I think I am taking care of my baby by doing my small part to make the world a little bit better than the one she was born into. And she said, I may be old school, but I think that's what you need to do. And I didn't say this part, but I was like, there's no maybe. You are old school. But, that is still the barrier that we need to overcome. And so for me, it was about owning the fact that I was the only woman for the bulk of the race running. And so I celebrated that. It was a centerpiece of my campaign. But also being a woman, being a mom. So when I announced my formal campaign, I launched it, as I mentioned, on my daughter's 3rd-month birthday. And the first policy I announced was that I wanted Maryland to become the first state in the nation to guarantee 3 months of paid family leave. And it's one of those policies where you know it's a no-brainer, right? It's better for the child, it's better for the parent, and frankly, as a CEO now, I can tell you that it was the first policy I instituted at my organization because I know it's better for the organization. And so that's where I do think that it's really important for us to embrace it. And I know we'll talk about, kind of women in voting a little bit later, but the reality is that we have the power in our own hands. Even in Maryland, even in the gubernatorial race, the majority of votes was cast by women. And yet I still think that we obviously have some hurdles in terms of having an electorate and electeds that are more consistent.
Thank you, and hopefully it's changing, and our differences also empower us, and I've seen it in the last, 2 years with the 2018 election, and one of my good friends is Ellie Schmiel, I don't know if you know Ellie, she's the president of the Feminist Majority. I remember I called her back in October, and I said, Ellie, I haven't talked to you. She goes, Chris, I have pneumonia, but you know what? She said, we got to get these women elected in Virginia, and I am out there every day, and call me like November 8th, and look what she did. I mean, and it's just hard, it's just persistence and hard work, but it's changing, and I'm thrilled. But behind every great candidate, there's an amazing person behind that person that really tells them how to raise money, which, of course, as we all know, is quite a daunting task. And that, I think, Michelle, I'm going to turn to you because I'm going to ask you about this ranked choice voting system and how that could help elect more women. I know you're an expert and you're working on our Ward 4 race, which of course I'm a DC person, and so I know what kind of battles you have going on here.
Yeah, well, I'll first take a step back. Similar to Krish, when I didn't start off in politics. My first job on Capitol Hill, I was working for the United Methodist Church, our public policy agency. I was a communications director, so I was helping church members, I'm a United Methodist, engaged in the discussions around women's health, the environment, all sorts of issues. And so one of the things that I realized when we were working on these issues and bringing folks to Capitol Hill was we had these great policies. We were talking to folks and we were saying here's a policy. It makes so much sense. They were like, okay, they took the information. We're like, I'll see, I can hear your points. I'll see, maybe we'll vote on it. And then when it came time to vote, they voted the other way on these issues. And it was like, what's going on? And it's like, you're hitting your head against the wall over and over on policies that seem to make sense, but the elected officials aren't voting in the interest of their communities. And what we see is there's a couple factors related to that. One, who's funding candidates and who's really backing them. If you have big donors, and we've seen this, big donors who are financing, those are the folks that they're listening to, because when they have to run for election again, they need to raise money from certain people, and that's impacting certain elected officials when they're running or when they're looking at policy. The second thing we see is with redistricting, how districts are structured can really disenfranchise communities and make it harder for people who are we're trying to make sure that our community is safe, that we're looking at in the best interest and raising education, all those sorts of issues, and that we're separating and breaking up those communities, so it's harder for them to vote for a candidate who is going to be in their best interest. So that moved me to work at Fair Vote, which is a national organization focused on electoral reform. And they've been doing work on redistricting reform and ranked choice voting. That's one of the things that I got really excited about, was because it was a new model for looking at how we vote and really taking a step back and saying the way the structures of how we vote are impacting us at that level. We can do a lot. We can have great candidates that come out. We can talk about the policies, but when we have a 8-person race for governor and you have the ballot and you're trying to do your vote, we have situations where we have split votes among like-minded candidates. They like Krish and they like somebody else, and they're like, who do I vote for? I gotta vote for one. They're doing this strategic voting in their head about who's the one who's most likely to win. That's not how we should be voting. You should be voting in this candidate represents my interest and that candidate represents my interest, and I can rank them and say, these are my preferred candidates. And that's what ranked choice voting does. It allows you, just like you would make a decision if you were going out to get coffee and you're like, I love, a caramel macchiato, but if that's not available, what's my second choice, right? This is what ranked choice voting does, and what it really helps is empower women, empower communities to be able to run candidates that are going to have a higher likely choice of winning the race, and really an opportunity to talk about the issues. And so what we've seen, I'm a member of the board of Represent Women, which is a national organization working on these structural reforms as well. And we've seen in cities that use ranked choice voting, they've seen 36% of the mayors are women in ranked choice voting cities compared to 23% in the 100 most populous cities in the US that don't use ranked choice voting. So even with a small subset, and if you have the paper with ranked choice voting, you see the number of cities right now. We're about like 12 different jurisdictions and more that are using it. We're seeing like this great impact, this multiplier effect by using reforms, whether it's ranked choice voting or public financing and redistricting reform. When you combine them, you're really empowering communities that have been marginalized by our electoral system. And I think it's important for us to really name that, you know, as Diane was pointing with the history of things, there's power structures that exist, and it takes a lot of work, hundreds of years, to move this forward. But power concedes nothing without a demand, right? And so we have to constantly be pushing and saying, if we want women, if we want communities of color, if we want to make sure that we have folks who are fighting for our environment, on education, we need to have the ability to get those folks elected, to have that representation. Ranked choice voting, along with other reforms, are really the kind of great soup of combination that really helps that happen for people. One of the things that, as a campaign manager, so working with candidates, and I've worked only with women candidates and candidates of color, is that it is so challenging being in the race. And one great thing that is that I've seen is with public financing, giving candidates an opportunity to really run effectively that they haven't had in our traditional election system. If you're familiar with what Montgomery County has done with the public financing system, that matching system really allowed a number of women to run this time, a number of candidates of color to run that traditionally would not, because they can't, bankroll thousands of dollars. The candidate that I worked for, Brandy Brooks, who was running at large, she, is working class, a trainer, an organizer, but she didn't have enough money to even say I can put $6,000 in the bit. She was like, I can maybe put 600, but we'll have to see how I balance lunch and everything else, if I do that. When we did the public financing system, we realized we could raise $150,000 to $200,000 that would really put her in, a viable chance to win the race. And we looked at who we wanted to have as our kind of base, and we said, the way that you were getting matching funds for her program, if it was a matching of up to $150 that somebody could donate and would be matched 3 times or 4 times. And so there are these great opportunities for us to say, well, we don't want to just try and find all the people who can give $150 because that's not the community, that's not the base that Brandy was part of. But we did know if we got those $50 donors or less, we had a number of them multiplying, we could raise a lot of, bring in a lot of folks who just aren't going to, they can't bankroll a candidate or anything like that.
Well, it was also, you were 7 times on the smaller donations.
7 times on the smaller donations,
And
yeah.
that's one of the things that I looked at was, I tried to do that so that my money went further.
Yeah, and exactly, that's the conversation we were having with people, and it was this multiplier effect that people were like, if I don't have a lot of money, but I know if I give $5, it becomes $25. They're like, oh, that's great. Okay, I'm in. I want to support this candidate, even if it's my $5. They know it matters. And we're doing the same thing in DC, and DC, the match for the race that I'm doing the campaign for, it's only $50. That's the max amount that she can receive, right? And that's matched 5 times. And what we're seeing again is that the people are really excited because they know it's not about raising thousands of dollars from just a few people. It's bringing in this huge base of people who are excited about candidates. Brandy was able to raise $160,000 through matching funds and small donor donations. Her average donation was around $48. The candidate I'm working for right now, her name is Janice Lewis George. We're currently at $170,000 raised from 660 donors who are giving, our average I think is around $40 or so, $43. These are the impact of that is that going up against a candidate in DC or in other places who is an established candidate who has corporations or developers supporting them, they're going to raise 3 times as much money. But if you build a base of people who are willing to back you with those small dollars, and they're talking to their community, and it's transformative. And that's why I'm really excited about these policies. It's about, it really does empower women to run for office, and it is an opportunity for them to be successful.
Absolutely, and building the base, and not just obviously for, for attracting the money, but also for helping get the vote out
Yeah.
and getting, I mean, I ran in 2012, of course, I tribute to my daughter because I had her on my campaign brochure, which I think I paid exactly $275 for my entire campaign. I ran citywide and won, but partly because I had a base of supporters, and we all kind of pulled our resources together as a team across the city, and so I ran citywide and it was really successful, but that was because of the base.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean, the support network, so you really do need the support network, as well, of course, as the money.
Yeah.
So speaking of money, we all say, put your money where your mouth is, and, you gotta vote with your wallet, and that's another topic here, and I can throw it out to any one of you to kind of see the trends and see, are you seeing trends of more women certainly putting their money where their mouth is in terms of the candidate?
Well, I think that women still are at somewhat of a disadvantage to the incumbent. If the incumbents are men or women, the incumbent has a lot more public exposure. They are known to the voters, and therefore I think they can raise more money. But this idea of publicly financed campaigns is a good one, and you all know it's been around for a while. You can tick it off on your federal, and not anymore, I think, but definitely the state return on your income taxes. I think that this current Montgomery County example is the beginning, and I think it should be supported on the way forward, because it is a way for more candidates with hopefully less corporate backing to have a chance to run. It wasn't there yet, although I do have some statistics. It does say that the voter turnout in Montgomery County in the primary in 2018 was almost 25% versus 17% 4 years earlier. So there's wondering whether this public campaign financing helped. And same in the general election was 63% versus only 42% 4 years earlier. There are a lot of factors, but they're thinking that might be one reason for it.
So I'll just say from my experience, so there's the two parts of it, right? In terms of women being comfortable asking, I find time and time again that if you ask a woman to, I serve on the Emerge Maryland board, and when women have to ask for the board or for another candidate, easy. When they've got to make the ask for themselves, and they have to make it as a hard ask, right? Like you get trained, don't say, oh, it'd be so great for you to contribute if you might have a chance at some point in the future. It's, I really need you to donate $1,000 to my campaign, and I've got my team right here ready to take your donation. And it's one of those things where it's just flexing a muscle. So much so that I think by the end of my campaign, I'd be out at dinner with my husband, and I'd have to hold myself back from asking the waiter for a donation just because it becomes second nature. But you just have to realize that if you don't ask, you're in the same position as if you do, because the worst thing they say is no, right? And that's where we do need to get more comfortable just doing it. On the other hand, kind of asking you shall receive, we do need to make sure that more women are wired to donate. So I know that when I was running, some of the staggering statistics I would see, depending on whether it was federal or state, if it was legislative or executive, was that only 20 to 28% of political donations were given by women. I think that has changed. It's really exciting to see that when we look at federal donations now compared to where we were in 2016, we've seen an increase of 182%. And if you look at the number of donors, women are starting to get closer in terms of just whether you donate or not. but in terms of dollars received, I think we're still at maybe less than a third. And I would just tell you from my personal experience, the number of women who kind of view politics as dirty, who say, well, you know, I donate to my church, or I donate to a nonprofit, or I'm really committed to a specific policy issue, but I don't donate to politicians. And it's like, well, to be clear, if you care about healthcare or the environment or your schools, all those are decided by the people in power. I still think that we need to educate women in terms of it's all right to donate. You know, politics is not a dirty word or profession. But then the other piece of it is, I will tell you, even, you know, trying to contact my, the Fortune Most Powerful Women, Women's Network, for example. The number of women who are COOs or CEOs who I contacted, compared to the men who serve in those same positions, who would say, well, I need to talk to my husband. Versus, I can count on one hand, actually one person who was a man in those positions who said, I need to talk to, you know, my spouse. And I'm not saying kind of a judgment on that. Like, I do think in financial decisions you should consult, but I do think that reflects kind of a disparity. So
Is that because men also are on the golf course?
that may
And they can,
be.
you know,
Yeah.
no, I mean, there are those kinds of, barriers, but,
So we
Michelle,
have
yeah, do you
an
have
opportunity with, I think Krish is right in terms of like, there's more financing that has to happen. And Represent Women did a study with Common Cause on just how PACs and leadership organizations were donating to candidates. And what they found in that was that PACs generally don't support women candidates who are running against incumbents. So they're less likely to support that. And they're also underfunding candidates who are running for open seats. So even when there's an opportunity for women to run in a race where they have an equal chance as anybody running, PACs are less likely to support them. And we see this also happen sometimes with how PACs or other leadership organizations are who they're endorsing. They may be more likely to endorse a man in an open seat race, even though there's a strong woman candidate in that race as well. The other piece that we saw in this study was that, in particular, Republican women are most likely to be underfunded and have whoever their candidate is receive extra funding, like be well funded to combat that Republican candidate, which we see for Republican women. They have lower representation in terms of the number of women who are serving in elected positions, and there's opportunities. There are leadership groups similar to the Democratic leadership groups. I think it's the Right to Run and other groups like that that are helping Republican women as well to, you know, train them up, but also to find those finance opportunities. But we see this kind of dynamic happening where women are mostly underfunded. Republican women have a big challenge where whoever's challenging them is more likely to fund them versus whoever they're running. So there's lots of opportunities for PACs and leadership groups, if they're interested in seeing more women in office, to really challenge like the committees that are making those decisions to put their money where their mouth is, to like say like, okay, if this is what we're doing, if we want to see more women in office, if that's what if we've supported public financing or other reforms that we've uplifted because we know that they help women get into office, then we need to actually be active in supporting those women, both with our dollars and endorsements and any other ways that they're doing that. And it's a continuing challenge because we don't see that happening as well as it should be. So yeah.
We're gonna open it up for questions, because I know you all probably have some.
And I would just like to add to Michelle and the ranked choice voting. You were saying all the advantages it would be to the candidates, but I think of it as advantages to the voters. Because you can vote for maybe out of 3 or 4 candidates, 2 that you would think would have a good chance would be your favorite candidates. And when somebody like that in a ranked choice voting situation does get elected, they have a wider support base. And so they start off on better footing later on because this many people actually voted. And it's not just a small percentage. If you have 7 people voting, it could be only 1/7
Yes.
of the vote plus one vote to
Yeah.
get you to win, right? But with ranked choice voting, I think the voter has more opportunity and the candidate starts off better. So
Yeah,
it's a win-win.
and some examples where we saw that in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they use ranked choice voting. Betsy Hodges was elected, the first mayor elected under ranked choice voting in Minneapolis. And one of the things that she did, which was refreshing, and I'm talking from the candidate side, but I'll show how this works out from the voter side, is she was able to go to the doors and talk to someone and say, like, I'm running for office, here's why I'm a great candidate. And they'd be like, oh, I'm supporting so-and-so. And she's like, that's great. You can support that candidate. I hope you'll make me your second choice. And so from the candidate side, it was like this new thinking and really appealing to everybody. So you weren't skipping a door just because they had a yard sign for somebody else. And then for the voter, they were really like, oh, great, I can consider you as my second choice. Oh, all right, I've got your name down. And so then they were able to really say, like, here's, just like that coffee example, here's who I would really like first. But if they're not available, if they can't win or they're not, whatever, I'm going to the next candidate and so on and so forth. So you're ranking your choices and then it gets counted. It's really transformative in the way that we look at it and creates more positive campaigns, because you cannot win a ranked choice voting election if you're going to tear down other candidates, because voters will say, like, you're going negative. I want the candidates who are really positive and showing me, like, if these are the issues that matter most to me, who are the candidates that are likely to represent me? And that's what we really need in our politics, and we want to see more of that happen. Maine is the first state to adopt ranked choice voting and use it statewide for their election, and they saw that happen with both Democratic candidates and independent candidates who were running for office. They were doing that same kind of conversation at the doors and throughout the election and forums, where they're talking about how we have like-minded issues. And I hope if you really like this other candidate, I hope you'll consider me as your second choice. And here's why I'll be a great second choice for you. That's really talking about how we need to be more collaborative, and we want to see that, I think, in our elected bodies, whatever level of government that is. And when we get that more of that collaboration, when it's about policies, we're lifting up policies and really trying to make sure that it's a positive conversation on those issues. So.
Right. And I, for those of you who remember Speaker Chip O'Neill, he used to say, people like to be asked. And I've always lived by this kind of thing. And I think going back to your point, you can't get them maybe on the first, if they have another, you can just ask them, whether it's for money, the vote, or helping organize, the grassroots. Yeah. So I hope everybody leaves here today. One, I hope consider running for office. And if not running, certainly organizing to make sure that women get in office. I hope this has been a really fascinating session for me personally, but I want to just open it up now to others in the audience. And
One thing that we like is that what wasn't really talked about, the 28,000 that were approached by Hogan on the voter roll. My husband is a Democrat, and his name is Brian Andrew Martin. So it's a very generic name. And so what they did was they actually took a data sheet and they moved it one down. So the address was wrong. So the Brian Martin that lives in Gaithersburg, which is my husband, was told that he was supposed to be in Baltimore. And so this is what I'm saying, is that we are not talking about this. We need to be talking about
So
this.
did you remedy that on election day, or?
He would
before?
not have been able to on election day. He would have just been told he could not vote. We went early voting because I was in Arlington County, and I said, honey, meet me and we're both gonna go early vote. That was how we found out.
Excellent. So early voting is an option. The other thing that's changed in the Maryland law is that you can register not only during early voting or correct addresses, whatever, but you can also do it on election day. So that is something that's new for Maryland.
I'm going to take, let's say, why don't we take, and we'll go to, yeah, please.
Yes, my question is, how would you advise women coming into the field to run the first time, get their presence felt and be connected? And the other part of my question is, I see a detachment of foreign-born nationals not fully engaged in the system, and that's what I'm working with right now. I'm with a forum to do that. what's the best way to reach out to them? There's so many became citizens, they're not yet connected, maybe they don't understand the system, they sort of are they suspicious about government systems, other countries where it's not so open like it is here. How can we bring them all to the table and make everybody involved?
Well, I'll say that it starts with organizing communities. So a lot of engagement, if there's communities that have traditionally not been as active in voting or are new to voting, then going to like where if there's community centers or cultural events where they're most likely to be present and active in whatever that event or activity is, it's an opportunity to introduce voting opportunities or other ways to engage. Also, if you're running for office and that's a potential base for you, then it's a good opportunity to be out there in public, talking to those folks and getting to build relationships within those communities. On the part of just like how you start running, I think that was kind of your question. There's I think there's lots of groups that do kind of those trainings initially. I would say like the one of the basics is just doing an evaluation and getting together a group of folks that are kind of supporters, friends, folks that you know who may have run for office before or have an interest in politics, so that you can start talking about like, what's the chances for me to run in, I want to run for this office, or what office do you think would be best for me to run for, and kind of having that discussion with your kitchen cabinet, if you want to call that, and then using that as an opportunity to kind of springboard your campaign. So bringing together folks who bring other lots of different skills, whether it's financing and fundraising piece, having a treasurer who has a background in campaigning or can connect you with other folks related to that, who can think about strategy and policy. So kind of having those different folks that you can talk to, and kind of they help you inform you throughout your campaign. So that one of the first things is just talking to your friends, and then also talking to your family, because you're making a big commitment when you do run for office, and finding like that support system to help you with running. So.
And if I can just,
Go ahead.
can I just add 2 comments? First, I do think it's terribly problematic in a state like Maryland that has the fastest growing foreign-born population of any state in the nation. You do see, different demographics punching below their weight. And I think some of it is cultural. If you ask my parents, they would say politics is dirty. And my poor parents, I have kids who both ended up being politicians, and it says my brother's running for mayor of Baltimore now. One of the things that I'd actually love to see is, I know it was such a moment of pride when my parents became naturalized. And I'd love to see, kind of targeting each group as they go through that day, which is kind of the most patriotic day, right? To say, this is the power of being a citizen. You ought to be voting. Because I still think we're not nearly as kind of connected and engaged with those groups as I think we could New Americans.
Except the league does go to Greenbelt
I was
and
gonna say.
Baltimore with the application to register to vote. And if we have this voter's guide, that would give them voting information. But for people who are online, we also have vote411.org for people to get their information online.
Yep.
I was just going to ask a yes or no question to everyone, but it's on the subject of kind of voter suppression based on a hearing I went to. Can anyone think of if you were at the polls and you saw someone who had come to vote and was turned away without voting? Can you think of any reason why they should have been?
Why they should have
Should be turned away without voting?
Oh.
Okay.
Well, the real ID, I will tell you, because I work on, the real ID is becoming an issue, and I know in Arizona, they're not even ready for real ID. I know you gotta have that has to be up and running according to our 2005 law, and that's an issue in some of the states, but, I'll turn to Michelle or Krish, that's.
Well, I don't presume to know somebody else's whether or not they're voting, because I believe, if we're going into the voting booth, I'm going there to vote. I'm not necessarily checking other people. I don't know how I would be able to qualify whether or not they should.
I didn't mean it as a trick
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Yeah. I'm just saying that what happened was in our state, in Baltimore, people went to the polls and were turned away.
Yeah.
And the hearing was, why should they have ever been turned away.
Oh, I don't think- yeah,
They should have voted
They
provisionally.
should have gotten a
They
provision
lost the
ballot,
vote.
yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
if he had gone on the day of voting, he would not have been able to cast a provisional ballot. Because of the way the law
Yeah,
was.
the way
And that, the only reason that he was able to cast a provisional ballot was because we went early voting. And that's what I'm saying, is that those 28,000 names that were accidentally purged, I'm pretty sure were probably Democrats.
But it was also, could have been a technical.
Of course it was a technical address issue.
We turn to the left.
I've served as an election judge in Maryland, and the answer to your question, in many cases, they have been purged or their polling place has been moved.
Yes.
But as someone said, in Maryland, you have the right to cast a provisional ballot.
Yes.
The problem is a lot of people don't know that. And then you
And
also
the
have
voting
poll
people,
monitors,
the poll-
you also have poll monitors that the parties have that are walking around intimidating people as well.
Yeah, that's, we only have a couple minutes, I'm sorry, we could talk about this all day, you all are fabulous, I mean, but wait, Tony, do you have time for one more
Yeah,
question?
we have time for one
Then
more
we can
question.
Wrap up.
I was just curious about the ranked choice voting. How do we go about, how does it get implemented in the state?
Thank you. That's a great question. I'll two things. One, cities can adopt ranked choice voting now if they wanted to. So a city council could adopt it with the exception of Baltimore. With the exception of Baltimore City because they are under the jurisdiction of the General Assembly. But that's why Tacoma Park has had it since 2006 and been using it for their elections. So any city could do that if you wanted to go and talk to your mayor and council and advocate for that. At the state level, we have a bill and if there's some material that we have.
And
There's
by the way, the sign-up sheet is full.
Yeah, I only had a couple, I didn't know. Thank you, everybody, so I can. There's a bill, Senate Bill 89, which is for updating our standards for voters, the voting system certification, which would allow Maryland voting machines to be updated for other voting methods, including ranked choice voting. So it's a general bill to make sure we're in the process. We're at a stage where we are renewing our lease with our election equipment, and so we want to make sure that our election equipment is modern and secure and up to date for whatever challenges we have before us now and generations in the future that want to make sure that they can do different types of elections. And I'll just say that is a benefit, getting this bill passed is really a benefit to any jurisdiction, especially cities. If cities wanted to, if they adopt ranked choice voting, they would have to run ranked choice voting election manually right now because our voting system is not up to date. And that's what Tacoma Park does. And they make it an interesting event to kind of show how a ranked choice voting election goes, but I think also we should spend our time not on counting the ballots ourselves by hand, but using the election equipment so that we can have an accurate count and everything. So that's the bill before us. And then the next step is we hope that some counties will adopt it. Montgomery County is interested. I've talked to our county council and there are several, both Mark Eldridge, the county executive, and several council members are interested in ranked choice voting, have supported it in the past, whether for Tacoma Park or other areas. So we're talking to folks in Montgomery County, but we're also interested in other counties that might be interested. And then there's also discussion about statewide bills for using ranked choice voting statewide for either presidential elections, gubernatorial elections. I don't think we're there yet for it, but the first step on all of that is back to Bill SB 89 to make sure that we update our equipment so that we're in the process and we can move forward with enabling it for cities and counties to use. So.
And you can join the League of Women Voters
Yes.
because we support ranked choice voting. And all of the positions that we do support and testify for before the council or the state they are a result of research and review. And so once we've done the study and come to this position, then we can advocate for it and the league does support it. So we support your ranked choice voting.
Thank you for your support.
Can I just make one quick one?
Do you all have?
So to the question of, for those who are thinking about running, some of you may have heard of Emerge Maryland, but the goal of it is, like Emerge America, is to train women who are thinking about running. There is a booth downstairs, so feel free to stop by. Please don't think that you need to. I do think that there is something that women sort of assume that they need to take that step in order to run. I'm not going to say it's just simply common sense, because there is a lot of everything that Michelle spoke about, but it is an opportunity. The other thing is that there's an informal group that I started that kind of organically grew out of my campaign, but also a number of other women who are running in kind of this wave. It's called She, Support Her Election. And the idea is that Emerge really focuses on the candidate. But I will tell you, because I actually was looking for an all-woman team and couldn't find it, because there aren't enough women that are part of the ecosystem as well. And so the goal is to really kind of connect women in terms of being involved with canvassing, hosting events, kind of everything that you need aside from being the candidate to run and win.
So, thank you all, and by the way, I have a television show and I'd like to have anyone who would come and anybody that has an interesting topic or doing something. I just had Conchita Sarnoff on this week, she aired last week. She uncovered the whole Jeff Epstein. Yeah, so, I look for people that are doing great things.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.
Let's give everyone a round of applause. Big thank you to Dr. Christine Warnke, Michelle Whittaker, Krish, and Diane. Thank you so much for coming.